Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to share something a little different, something that's been on my mind for a while now. I found a letter I wrote to myself 50 years ago, and everything I predicted about my life was wrong. My name is Eleanor Wright. I'm 73 years old, and last spring I discovered that the person I was at 23 had no idea who I would become or what would actually matter. I was cleaning out my childhood home after my mother passed away. She was 96 and had lived in that house for 70 years. So you can imagine the amount of stuff accumulated in the attic, the basement, the closets. My sister and I spent weeks going through boxes of old clothes, furniture, Christmas decorations from the 1960s, things our mother couldn't bear to throw away but hadn't looked at in decades. In the back of my old bedroom closet, behind some boxes of my high school yearbooks and college textbooks, I found a shoebox I didn't recognize. Inside were some photographs, a few dried flowers from my high school prom corsage, and a sealed envelope with my handwriting on it. The envelope said, "To Eleanor, age 73. Open on your birthday, 2024. I had completely forgotten about this letter. I must have written it sometime in 1974, when I was 23 years old, fresh out of college and full of certainty about how my life would unfold. I sat down on the floor of that empty bedroom, surrounded by boxes and dust, and I opened the envelope. The paper was yellowed, and the ink had faded a bit, but I could still read every word of my younger self's confident predictions about the future. The letter started with, "Dear future Eleanor." I wrote that I was sealing this letter to be opened in 50 years. When I would be 73, because I wanted to see if my life had turned out the way I planned. And then, in neat handwriting that looked nothing like my handwriting now, my 23-year-old self laid out exactly what she expected her life to become. I wrote that by 73, I would be a renowned professor of English literature at a prestigious university, probably Columbia or Yale. I'd have published at least 5 books of literary criticism that would be considered essential reading in the field. I'd be respected, maybe even famous in academic circles. Students would seek me out. Colleagues would value my opinions. I'd have made a real contribution to the world of ideas. I wrote that I would be married to someone brilliant, probably another academic, someone I could have deep intellectual conversations with over dinner. We'd live in a beautiful old house filled with books, somewhere like Cambridge or Berkeley. We'd travel to literary conferences around the world. We'd host salons where interesting people gathered to discuss art and literature and philosophy. I wrote that I definitely wouldn't have children, because children would distract from the life of the mind I was committed to. I'd seen what happened to women who had children, how their careers stalled, how they got stuck in domestic life while men continued advancing. I was determined not to let that happen to me. My legacy would be my work, not a family. I wrote that by 73, I'd look back on a life of purpose and achievement. I'd be satisfied knowing I'd pursued excellence, that I'd contributed something meaningful, that I'd lived according to my principles. I'd have no regrets about the choices I'd made, because they would all have been in service of becoming the person I was meant to be. Sitting on that floor at 73, reading what I'd written at 23, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, because none of it happened. Not one single thing I predicted came true. My life went in a completely different direction, and the person I became was nothing like the person I'd been so sure I would be. Here's what actually happened. I did go to graduate school for English literature, just like I planned. I got accepted to a good program, started my PhD, and for the first 2 years, everything seemed to be on track. I was a serious student. I read constantly. I wrote papers that my professors praised. I was going to study Victorian literature and write my dissertation on George Eliot. I was going to be brilliant. But in my 3rd year of the program, I met someone. His name was Tom, and he wasn't an academic. He was a carpenter who'd been hired to renovate the old house I was renting with 2 other graduate students. He was quiet and thoughtful, and he made beautiful things with his hands. We started talking while he worked, and then we started having coffee together, and then we fell in love. My fellow graduate students thought I was making a mistake. They thought Tom wasn't intellectual enough for me, that I was settling, that I'd get bored. My advisor suggested gently that perhaps I should focus on my studies rather than getting distracted by relationships. Everyone seemed to think that falling in love with a carpenter was beneath me, beneath my potential. But I couldn't help it. Tom saw me in a way nobody else did. He didn't care about my theories or my career ambitions. He cared about who I was when I wasn't trying to impress anyone. He made me laugh. He taught me how to use tools, how to fix things, how to work with my hands instead of just my mind. He showed me that there were other ways of being intelligent, other ways of creating meaning that had nothing to do with publishing papers or earning degrees. I finished my coursework, but I never wrote my dissertation. I left the PhD program in my 4th year, which felt like an enormous failure at the time. I'd invested so much, worked so hard, and I was just walking away from it all. My professors were disappointed. My parents were confused. I was terrified that I was throwing away my future. Tom and I got married when I was 27. We moved to a small town in Vermont where the cost of living was manageable, and he could build his carpentry business. I got a job teaching English at the local high school, which seemed like such a come down after planning to teach at an Ivy League university. High school teacher instead of distinguished professor. Small town instead of cosmopolitan city. Ordinary life instead of extraordinary achievement. And then, despite all my certainty at 23 that I would never have children, I got pregnant. It wasn't planned. Tom and I had been careful, but these things happen. When I found out, I was 30 years old and absolutely terrified. I built my whole identity around being a serious intellectual, around choosing work over family, around being different from other women. Having a baby felt like giving up, like admitting defeat. But my daughter was born, and everything changed. I named her Julia. She was small and wrinkled and perfect. And when I held her for the first time, something shifted inside me that I can't really explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. All my grand plans, all my ambitions, all my ideas about who I was supposed to be, they just seemed less important suddenly. I kept teaching at the high school. I was never going to be famous or publish groundbreaking books, but I was good at what I did. My students learned to love literature because I loved it and I knew how to share that love. Some of them went on to study English in college. A few became teachers themselves. Several have stayed in touch over the years, telling me I made a difference in their lives. It wasn't the kind of impact I dreamed about at 23, but it was real. Tom and I had 2 more children. A son, Michael, 2 years after Julia, and then another daughter, Sarah, 3 years after that. Our house was never filled with famous intellectuals having sophisticated conversations. It was filled with noise and chaos and toys everywhere and arguments about homework and who left their shoes in the middle of the floor. It was ordinary family life, the kind I'd sworn I would never settle for. I kept reading, kept learning, kept growing intellectually. But I did it in stolen moments between loads of laundry and helping with homework and making dinner. I read novels after the kids went to bed. I thought about ideas while I was folding clothes or driving carpool. My intellectual life didn't disappear, but it wasn't the center of everything anymore. It was woven into the fabric of a much fuller, messier, more complicated life. The years passed quickly. The kids grew up. Julia became a social worker. Michael became a nurse. Sarah became an elementary school teacher. None of them particularly intellectual careers by the standards I'd had at 23, but all of them careers focused on helping people, on making a tangible difference in the world. I'm proud of them in ways I never anticipated. Tom and I are still married, 46 years now. We live in the same small town in Vermont, in a house he largely built himself. I retired from teaching 5 years ago. We have 6 grandchildren now. Our life is quiet and simple. We read, we garden, we babysit the grandkids, we take walks in the woods. We have dinner with our children and their families most Sundays. It's the kind of life I would have found impossibly boring at 23. The kind of life I would have pitied. And yet, sitting on that floor reading my letter, I realized something. Every single prediction I made about what would make me happy was wrong. Every assumption I had about what mattered, about what constituted a meaningful life, about who I needed to become, all of it was based on ideas I'd absorbed from books and professors and the culture around me, not on any real understanding of myself. At 23, I thought happiness meant achievement and recognition. I thought it meant being special, standing out, making a mark that would outlast me. I thought domestic life was a trap, that ordinariness was something to avoid at all costs, that the only lives worth living were extraordinary ones. But the life I actually lived, that one I stumbled into rather than planned, has been deeply satisfying in ways I couldn't have imagined back then. Teaching high school students wasn't as prestigious as being a university professor, but it was more rewarding. I got to watch young people discover literature, see their faces light up when they understood something for the first time. That mattered more than publishing papers that 3 other specialists would read. Raising children wasn't the distraction from meaning I thought it would be. It was meaning itself, just a different kind than I'd been looking for. Being part of shaping 3 human beings, watching them grow and struggle and figure out who they were, being there for them through all of it, that was profound work. It changed me in ways that studying Victorian literature never could have. And my marriage to Tom, which everyone thought was me settling for someone beneath my intellectual level, turned out to be the most important relationship of my life. He's taught me more about what matters, about how to live well, than any book or professor ever did. He's shown me that wisdom comes in many forms, that intelligence isn't just about ideas and words, that a life focused on craft and family and community can be just as rich as one focused on achievement and recognition. I'm not famous. I never published those books. I'm not a renowned anything. If you searched my name online, you'd find almost nothing. By the standards my 23-year-old self had, I'm a failure. I gave up on my dreams. I settled for ordinary. I became exactly the kind of person I swore I never would be. But here's the truth. I'm happier than I ever would have been if I'd achieved everything I planned. I have a richness in my life, a depth of connection and meaning that the person I wanted to become at 23 would never have experienced. That version of Eleanor would have been impressive, maybe even important, but she would have been lonely. She would have missed out on so much love, so much joy, so much of what actually makes life worth living. The letter I wrote at 23 was written by someone who thought she knew everything but actually knew nothing. She thought she understood what would make her happy, but she was just repeating back ideas she'd been taught about success and achievement. She had no idea who she really was or what she actually needed. She was smart and ambitious and full of plans, but she lacked the wisdom to understand that plans are just guesses, that life rarely unfolds the way you expect, and that the things you're absolutely certain about at 23 might turn out to be completely wrong. I kept that letter. I put it in a frame on my desk where I can see it every day, not because I'm proud of it, but because it reminds me of something important. It reminds me that we don't know ourselves as well as we think we do, especially when we're young. It reminds me that the life we think we want might be nothing like the life that will actually fulfill us. It reminds me to be humble about my certainties, because I've been absolutely certain before and been absolutely wrong. If you're young right now, if you're making plans and setting goals and deciding who you're going to become, I want you to hold those plans lightly. I want you to stay open to the possibility that you might be wrong about what will make you happy. I want you to pay attention to what actually brings you joy, even if it's not what you planned, even if it's not impressive, even if it doesn't fit the story you've told yourself about who you're supposed to be. The life you're living right now, with all its unexpected turns and disappointments and surprises, might be leading you somewhere better than anything you could have planned. The person you're becoming might be more fulfilled, more content, more genuinely yourself than the person you're trying to be. You don't have to achieve everything you dreamed of to have a meaningful life. You don't have to be extraordinary to be happy. I'm 73 years old. I never became the person I planned to become at 23, and I'm grateful for that. Because the person I actually became, through all the detours and changes and letting go of plans, is someone I like much better, someone who knows what matters, someone who understands that an ordinary life filled with love and connection and purpose is worth more than an extraordinary life focused on achievement and recognition. My 23-year-old self was completely wrong about everything, and that's the best thing that ever happened to me.